What's going on, everybody? Cleopas Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the Samsung Galaxy A04s and going over whether or not it's actually a good phone to buy in 2023. Now, this phone did technically come out pretty recently, and as of the recording of this video, it's not officially launched in the US, but it still does have some pretty decent qualities that definitely make it worth considering in some situations. So we're going to go over this phone's specs and features to help you decide whether or not it's the right phone for you. Now, as always, if you do end up wanting to learn more about it, definitely check out the description where I will be linking to several other videos about this phone, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. So with the Samsung Galaxy A04s, we're getting a 6.5-inch 90Hz PLS LCD display with a 720p resolution, a PPI of 270, and a 20:9 aspect ratio. So in pretty much every way, for more of an entry-level phone, the display we're getting here is about average. At 6.5 inches, it is decently large, maybe not the largest out there, but for most people, if you're doing stuff like web browsing, social media, watching videos, honestly really anything, it is definitely going to be large enough to give you a good experience. And in addition to this, despite only having a 720p resolution, the image is still decently sharp and clear. The colors and brightness also look really nice. And with the 90Hz refresh rate, the movement on the screen is going to be a bit faster and smoother than usual, making the phone feel more premium to use. And with a 20:9 aspect ratio, we're also getting a decently tall and narrow form factor here. So if you're doing something in landscape mode like watching a video or looking at photos, for example, you're going to get a nicer, more immersive experience. Things are going to look a bit more cinematic. And then if you're maybe browsing the web or using social media, for example, with a form factor like this, you'll be able to fit a decent amount of content on the screen without having to scroll too much. So overall, despite not being anything really out of the ordinary per se, I do think the Samsung Galaxy A04s has a good display. And if you're going to be on your phone a decent amount, whether you're doing more basic activities like web browsing, or you're going to be consuming a lot of content, either way, I do think most people will get a good experience here. Now for storage, with the Samsung Galaxy A04s, this phone does have 64GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, so definitely a great amount of storage here. Now keep in mind, since again, as of the recording of this video, the Samsung Galaxy A04s is not currently being offered by US carriers. This phone in my hand, of course, is a factory unlocked international phone, and if this phone does end up making it to the US, the storage might be different, but as of right now, the only version of the Samsung Galaxy A04s I know of does actually have 64GB, which again is a great amount of storage. I want to say in this price range, when it comes to more entry-level devices, there's a really good amount of phones, if not most of them, that only have 32, and I feel like at this point in 2023, 32GB is really just not enough storage. With stuff like apps, the system, and just files in general getting larger and larger, sure, we do get microSD card expansion with pretty much any phone, but even then, if you have a lot of apps, that's really going to fill up pretty quickly. So I feel like in this day and age, 64GB is honestly more of a minimum. But that being said, with 64GB, for the average user, I do think this is definitely a decent amount of space, and as long as you're mindful of what you're putting on your phone, and you make sure to offload whatever you can to a microSD card, with this amount of storage, most people are going to be just fine. Now for security features, with the Samsung Galaxy A04s, this phone does have Face Unlock, as well as a fingerprint scanner right here on the power key. So definitely nice to get both options here. But real quick, let's give the fingerprint scanner a try. There we go. One more time. And there we go. So as you can see, real fast and responsive, no issues at all. And again, this phone does have Face Unlock too, so if you want to use that instead, you always can. Now taking a look at the camera setup here, with the Samsung Galaxy A04s, we got a typical water drop notch for the front-facing camera. I want to say most phones in this general price range are going to have basically the same design. This camera is 5 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a triple camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So in general, when it comes to camera features, this phone does have a pretty decent setup here. Unfortunately, there's no ultra-wide camera. That's really my only complaint here. I feel like at this point in 2023, having an ultra-wide camera should really be a standard, but unfortunately, not that many phones in this price range are going to have one anyway, so it's not really that big a deal. But just keep in mind, if you do like to get those wider angle photos, you are going to want to get something else. But aside from that, we do get a macro camera, so definitely great there. In portrait mode on this phone also does work really well. When it comes to photo quality, for a really entry-level phone like this, that's honestly one of the most impressive things about this phone. To give you an idea of what it can do, here's some pictures taken with the Samsung Galaxy A04s, and again, definitely really impressive. I mean, getting a 50 megapixel camera for a phone that's like $150, or even less depending on the deal you find, it's definitely impressive, and this really goes to show that if you want to take nice photos, whether it's for something like social media, where things really need to be super presentable, or maybe something more casual, no matter what the case may be, you really don't need to spend $1,000 or even $500 on a super high-end phone. You could just get something like this that's less than $200 and still get really good pictures. So overall, if you do like to take a good amount of photos, you don't necessarily care about having an ultra-wide camera, but you do want to get really good photo quality, you're really not going to be disappointed with the Samsung Galaxy A04s. So yeah, when it comes to the camera setup, even at this point in 2023, there's some phones in this price range or maybe a little above that have comparable cameras, but honestly, for what it is, the Samsung Galaxy A04s definitely has an abnormally good camera. So if you are looking for a more affordable, kind of basic device, but you do want a nice camera too, then definitely keep this in mind. Now when it comes to RAM and processor, with the Samsung Galaxy A04s, this phone is getting 4GB of RAM with the Exynos 850 processor. In general, in my experience, definitely not the fastest phone ever, and if you're going to be on your device a lot, doing stuff like mobile gaming that's a little bit more demanding, and then maybe browsing Instagram or TikTok that has a bit more animation than, say, Twitter, for example. In that kind of situation, if you're really going to be doing that stuff all the time, you will notice this is definitely not the fastest phone out there, but at the same time, for more casual, basic use like web browsing, really light social media browsing, and watching the occasional video every now and then, for that more light kind of activity, while not being super fast or anything, I do think the Samsung Galaxy A04s is at least going to be good enough. Now I did run a benchmark test on this phone using Geekbench 5, and here are the results I got. So what I recommend doing is running this test on your current phone, and then comparing your results to these, and that's going to give you a better idea of where this phone stands performance-wise. In general though, again, if you're really looking for a device for more of the basics, despite not being super impressive or anything, I do think the performance we're getting with this phone is at least going to be good enough. For the battery, the Samsung Galaxy A04s has a 5000 mAh battery that supports 15-watt fast charging, so definitely a great battery here. The charging speeds are pretty standard. I want to say most phones around this price range have the same kind of charging, if not maybe a little weaker, so I feel like for most people, you're really not going to have any issues. And then of course, with a 5000 mAh battery, you can definitely expect to get great battery life and longevity here. So if you're in a situation where maybe you're not always around a charger, but you need something that's really going to last all day, in that case, a phone like this that has such a large battery is definitely going to be a great choice. And then of course, down the road as the battery degrades, which all batteries do, with a 5000 mAh battery as opposed to say like a 3000 mAh battery, it's not going to wear out nearly as quickly. So with a phone like the Samsung Galaxy A04s, if you like to get one phone and keep it for a longer time without having to replace it, this is definitely going to be a good choice for that too. When it comes to software, with the Samsung Galaxy A04s, we are getting Android 13, and it did actually come with Android 13, so definitely great to see here. And in addition to this, knowing Samsung's software support, you can also expect several other major updates in the future. So I believe it's also going to get Android 14, 15, 16, and 17. So compared to almost every other phone in this price range, the software support you're getting with the Samsung Galaxy A04s, or really any A-series phone for that matter, is definitely quite a bit better. Now one other thing I do want to point out here is that unfortunately, the Samsung Galaxy A04s does not have NFC, which on one hand I'm not really surprised, but on the other hand, at this point in 2023, with contactless mobile payments, which you do need NFC to make, becoming more and more popular and widely used, I was hoping we'd start to see some more affordable phones with that feature, but unfortunately we're not quite there yet. But I guess since not very many phones in this price range even have NFC either, it's not really that big a deal. But just keep in mind, if you do like to use tap and pay, you are going to want to skip this phone. But in conclusion, is the Samsung Galaxy A04s actually worth buying in 2023? In general, despite definitely not being a bad phone in and of itself, there are really only two main reasons I can think of why you would want to get this phone factory unlocked, as opposed to getting something like the Samsung Galaxy A03s, most likely for free or close to it through a carrier deal. The first one being the storage. With this phone, again, we are getting 64GB of internal storage, which compared to most entry-level phones like this is quite a bit more. I mean, the Samsung Galaxy A03s does only have 32GB, and so does almost every other US phone in that price range. So the point is, if you really are looking for more of an entry-level phone, but you also do want a decent amount of storage, then compared to most other options, this phone definitely will have an advantage. The other reason why you might want to get this phone is the camera. With the 50 megapixel camera, not very many phones under $200 are going to have nearly as good of a camera. Even something like the Samsung Galaxy A13 5G, I feel like in my experience, the camera we're getting here is still better. So in general, if you are looking for a really entry-level device, but you do also want a nice camera, that is another reason why you might want to get this phone. But honestly, just keep in mind, because this phone is not officially launched in the US, you are going to have to get it factory unlocked, so you're not going to get any crazy deals on it. And being that there are phones like the Samsung Galaxy A14 5G, for example, that are going for sometimes even free through carriers, if you can get that phone for cheaper than this, then I honestly wouldn't even bother with this phone. But in general, if you are looking for a really entry-level device, and you're really only going to be doing more basic activities, but you also want a good amount of storage and a good camera, then while it may not be the best option out there, I do think this phone is still at least worth considering. Now once again, if you do want to learn more about the Samsung Galaxy A04s, definitely check out the description, where we'll be linking to several other videos about it, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipis Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.